deservedly so, to Riccarton Bush.
Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise with great pleasure to talk to the Riccarton Bush Amendment Bill in its second reading. As others have alluded to, I'm very familiar with Riccarton Bush. I've been there many times during the period that I studied horticulture at Lincoln. Subsequently, we filmed it for the Garden Show on many occasions. And that's because it is unique to New Zealand. And that is part of the reason why I'm particularly in support of this effort to make sure that it is set in proper governance, that the ability of the board to preserve, protect and conserve this native bush remnant of New Zealand is allowed to happen in the best way possible. It seems to me, as someone who's looked at native reserves over a long period of time, nigh on 30 years, that this, as the oldest protected natural piece of bush in New Zealand, really does require our protection as people who legislate. Before us, there were the Deans family, and we've heard from Jerry Brownlee, the sponsoring Member of Parliament for Ireland, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, that this has a proud history and a unique history, because the brothers Deans, one of whom was drowned at an early age, and I guess the mantle of protecting that wonderful piece of bush was then taken up by his widow, Jane. The Deans family were original colonial conservators. They decided that this was a piece of land that needed to be preserved, and they took a leadership role, which I would have to say many down the decades have followed, but perhaps not quite as diligently as the Deans family. When they gifted it to New Zealand, they did so with sums of money involved. They did so with a rigorous governance structure around it, and it really did set a benchmark and a gold standard for the sort of governance that we've seen in covenanted land with the Queen Elizabeth Council and so forth. So Riccarton Bush remains a unique feature, and I'm going to explain a little bit about why it needs to be preserved in the way that it has been suggested by this legislation. As I've said, I've filmed there many times. It is highly significant in this country. It was formed at a time when Victorian gardens were the vogue, and so therefore we have the oldest pear tree in New Zealand. It's a French cultivar that was planted in 1846. It's still fruiting, I believe. I haven't seen it in the last few years, but it is something that is a unique species and a unique feature. And I know that people who do heritage fruit growing and so forth have taken cuttings from it, and it continues to live on. And this is one of the truly attractive elements of the people like the Deans, who are visionaries, who make sure that something is preserved in perpetuity, and then gardeners take on that mantle in their own way. So for me, that pear tree, this French cultivar from 1846, lives on in thousands of gardens through the Canterbury area and throughout New Zealand. At the time that the Deans were putting their own private garden down, conifers were in vogue. That was the Victoriana moment. So it has the oldest living conifer in New Zealand that has been imported. It's a Western Himalayan fir, nearly 30 metres tall. It's a remarkable tree. It has been protected, and again, that would not have occurred without the visionary determination and tenacity of the Deans family. For most of us that have ever been to the bush, it is the kahikatea, as it's known, the white pine, that really sets it apart. This is a tree that has truly been part of our colonial heritage. It was cut down and used for furniture, for buildings and for butter boxes, can you imagine, to send butter back to the United Kingdom. So it was not highly valued, but it was decimated. And it was originally called a podocarp when John Banks came here, no, not that one, with Captain Cook back in the mid-1700s. He looked at Joseph Banks. He looked at the way in which it was classified and thought it was a unique species and thought it was a podocarp. It was subsequently renamed, and it's called a dacrycarpus. So there you go. Say that fast 3 times, Shane Jones, and see how you fare. But the kahikatea is called the white pine. It's not a pine at all. But the Deans family, when they did chop it down, they used that colonial approach of making the most of what was around them, but not over-abusing it. So many of the existing older buildings that remain at Riccarton Bush have actually been felled from the kahikateas, and the buildings have been made from those trees, which is a fantastic living legacy once again. Fossil remains of the kahikatea date back some 130 million years. It is a Gondwanaland tree, and it has been recognised internationally David Bellamy came across to New Zealand in the mid-90s and filmed a program in his Moa's Ark that was based at Riccarton Bush because of its unique heritage, and he was endlessly impressed in that knowledgeable and lisping way that he had down to a fine art, that this was a remarkable piece of bush, and he praised these New Zealanders, the Deans, for having the foresight to make sure that it would be preserved in perpetuity. It has also been a sacred place to Māori. It's called Pū Tairanga Motu, and that translates to meaning, basically the location is Pū, Tairanga is the ear, and Montha is the isolated clump of trees. That's Riccarton Bush itself, because Māori legend has it that at a clearing in the bush, if a trained person put their ear to the ground, they could hear people coming, and they could hear if there was an enemy approaching, because this is very swampy land, and I think ultimately that is why the Deans were so successful in keeping it intact, and I commend them on that. When we were at Select Committee, and many other members have talked about how we went as a Select Committee to Christchurch to hear the submissions. We had a great-grandson of the original founders of Deans Bush who came and talked to us. We were also privileged to talk with Brian Malloy, who edited a book on Riccarton Bush, Pū Tairanga Motu, and he donated that book to our parliamentary library. And in fact, I went and had a look at it. I've got one at home, but I went and got it out of the library this afternoon to remind myself of what an extraordinary heritage the Deans family have left us, and what a huge responsibility we now have as legislators to ensure that it remains as easy as possible for this family to continue to keep this piece of bush and the surrounding historic buildings in perpetuity. They were very excited, the trustees, when they came to talk to us, because the cottage had been damaged by the earthquakes, and they were looking to raise funds and to restore the cottage. And there is an enormous amount of support. As I think Jerry Brownlee said very eloquently earlier, it remains a symbol for the people of Christchurch, who love their gardens. It is, of course, the garden city, but it remains a symbol of what's possible and how it can uplift people and carry them through difficult times because of its longevity, and because it has been there for a long time and will endure beyond this generation and successive generations. So as legislators, I think we take that responsibility very seriously. I think that certainly as someone who's visited the area, the city, after the earthquake, I was encouraged to see that it had not sustained very much damage. As to why that would be, more educated, seismologist-oriented people than I could hazard a guess, but it seems to me that, without getting too fanciful about it, that the spirit of the Deans family has enveloped it. And I think that as a group of Christchurch people, Cantabrians, they have led the way in an inspirational way, and it behoves us well as legislators to ensure that the board and the chief executive officer of Riccarton Bush will be able to do what they want to do in as easy and expedient as way as possible. They have struggled with bureaucracy. There are 3 pieces of legislation that inform the governance of Riccarton Bush. It's pretty complicated. I know that the Honourable Jerry Brownlee looked at it carefully and decided to take this course of action with this piece of legislation so that it could be done in a fast way, and it would be done in a way that kept the integrity of this extraordinary property. So for the second reading of the Riccarton Bush Amendment Bill, I commend it to the House, and I commend us all in the Select Committee, very well led by our Chief Executive, to our Select Committee Chair, I should say, to make sure that we argue this through in a very good way. In fact, as with the previous piece of legislation we talked about today, this has been relatively trouble-free. The opposition have had the occasional pot shot tonight about protecting other heritage and tried to broaden it out into a political issue, as is their wont. But I think, generally speaking, as we heard the submissions, as the people of Christchurch, when we went to them, came to us and said this is needed to be preserved because of these reasons, we listened to them carefully with an open mind, and also with the sort of tolerance and informed decision which I haven't seen on very many other occasions in my 10 months or so in the House. The political stuff was pretty much left to one side, and I think that is, again, something that reflects well on us as politicians, because even the most obdurate opposition person could not possibly not support this bill in the spirit and intention of which the Honourable Jerry Brownlee put it together. Riccarton Bush, of course, was gifted by the Deans family to the people of Canterbury, and that's going back to 1914. But beyond that, I think it has spread to encompass, I suppose, the affections, and it's gone well into the heart of all of us in New Zealand who like to go to see intact bush. Last week I was at Outward Bound, and the Kahikatea Grove there was a place where we climbed the trees. I think the spirit and intention of that white pine and these dacrycarpus are things that I personally treasure and want to do. So yes, I might go and climb the trees at Riccarton Bush. This is entirely possible, Mr. Banks. I won't be falling out either, much as the opposition would like that to occur. People like us who are gardeners do, in fact, enjoy it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I commend this bill to the House.
I'm advised that caller